Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Khaled Hassanin, and I'm the Associate Dean, Graduate Studies and Research. We're just giving at DeGroote, we are just giving others a minute or so to join us, and we will begin shortly. Okay, I think we are ready to go. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this Knowledge Lab webinar. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We are always thrilled to see people joining these webinars from all over North America and the world. So thank you for continuing to support DeGroote and our programming. Given the topic, I would like to start with a quick update about the McMaster Digital Transformation Research Center. Launched in 2017 as part of the school's strategy to make digital transformation a main area of focus for the school. Its main objectives are to help individuals, organizations, and society at large understand and navigate the massive digital transformation that we are experiencing in every facet of our lives. An important part of our vision is to work closely with the business community on collaborative projects and research contracts to address their specific needs in this area. We are undertaking innovative approaches to invoke neuroscience tools to gain a deeper understanding of the user experience as they engage in using digital technologies or making decisions. So for example, we are tracking eye movements, monitoring heart rate, skin conductance, brain waves, and facial expressions to gain that deeper understanding and combining these with more traditional approaches of interviewing participants as well as surveying them. I have been the founding director since 2017, but will be stepping down at the end of this month as I begin my new role as Dean for the faculty. Dr. Milena Head, who is the moderating the panel today, will take over as director for the center starting July 1st. Please approach her to explore opportunities for collaboration if you have interest in this area. So for today, we have a very interesting topic lined up for us. Something that applies to all of us more than ever as we work from home and connect with people and services virtually. We are relying on the internet more than ever to keep us connected, but at what cost? Specifically from a privacy perspective, and that's what the focus for today's webinar will be. We have a panel of 3 McMaster and DeGroote alumni today who are experts in their fields and will answer some of these questions for us. Talk about what we should know and also share some examples around policy and examples of data privacy issues and what we can learn from them. I would now like to introduce today's panelists. Starting with Jean Pecman, who will be joining us. Jean is a senior business advisor at Fasken. Jean holds an MA from McMaster University in economics. He is currently a senior fellow with the C.D. Howe Institute, Competition Policy Council, and a TMX industry professor for DeGroote Business School at McMaster. Our next panelist is Rupinder Dhillon, who is the Chief Data Officer, Data Innovation and AI at HBC. Rupinder is a graduate of our BCom program. Our third panelist is Vass Bednar. Vass is the Executive Director of the McMaster's Public Policy and Digital Society program at the Faculty of Social Science. She is a graduate of McMaster University's Arts and Science program and was recently recognized as an outstanding alum with a McMaster Arch Award. Welcome, Vass, John, and Rupinder, and thank you for being here today and sharing your insights on this important topic with us. Moderating today's discussion will be my colleague and DeGroote professor and alumna, Dr. Milena Head. Milena is a professor of information systems at DeGroote. She is the Wayne C. Fox Chair in Business Innovation and Academic Director of the EMBA program at DeGroote School of Business. And as I mentioned, she is the incoming director of the McMaster Digital Transformation Research Center. She's an accomplished educator and researcher in human-computer interaction, including on today's topic. Milena, I will now turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Khaled. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, wherever you might be joining us from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today on this very important topic. We're going to get started with a little bit of a poll to get a sense of the audience. So we've got a little bit of a poll to get your feel around your use of data and your concerns around privacy. And as the numbers come in, we will reveal what our audience is feeling, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of those concerns or questions that you might have. All right, so as we start off and allow people to answer this poll, let me get some housekeeping, first of all, in place. Before we get started, there's a few things to go over. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this discussion. We're planning about 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes for the Q&A. Please do enter your questions in the Q&A panel of Zoom. I would encourage you to do so as we're going through our discussion today, because those questions that popped into your head, you might easily forget. If you're like me, you might easily forget by the time we get to the end. So please do go ahead and pop those questions into the Q&A panel as we go through our discussion, and we'll try to make sure we get to as many as we can as well. There were also some questions that came in beforehand, and we'll try to get to as many of those as well. Please note that this event is being recorded for marketing and promotional purposes, and/or will be shared with DeGroote, McMaster, and/or speakers, participants, or other partners. Please contact the marketing and community engagement team if you have any questions about that. And with that, let's see if we can actually see the results of our poll and what the feelings are. Since the beginning of the pandemic, have you been spending more or less time online? I would be very surprised if the majority was saying less time. So as expected, yes, we have been doing everything online, and that's where we're going to start our first question as well. How would you rate your knowledge of privacy rights in Canada from our audience? It seems like there are some that feel that they have good or very good, but the majority is, it's somewhere in the middle, and some people are really feeling left out when it comes to their knowledge of privacy rights in Canada. How concerned are you about protecting your personal privacy online? Very concerned, with 54% of our participants here today, which makes sense. That's why you're here, being concerned about their personal privacy and how to better protect their personal privacy. Concerns that you have about your personal information and how it's being used, or whether it might be stolen. Again, very concerned. Not surprising given the topic that we have today, and hopefully we'll give you some information that can be practical, that can help you on an individual level. And in general, do you feel that businesses respect your privacy rights? Yes, about 19%, but no at 45%. So there's concern about what businesses are doing with your data. All right, so that gave us as a panel some good feel as to who is in our audience and what the burning issues or the topics might be. So let's go back to that first question around the pandemic, the big elephant in the room, right? Now that over the last year plus, we have had to do so much online. It's not just social media, but we've had to really on a dime be able to switch up everything that we're doing online, from work, looking at the platforms like we're using today, Zoom, all the video conferencing platforms, concern about whether or not there are privacy issues, and where should we be most concerned? Is it for the technology that we use for work to be able to continue doing our work, such as video conferencing? Is it the social media apps that allow us to stay connected during our social distancing? So where do we think are the biggest gaps when it comes to data privacy today? And where should we be most concerned, in which areas? Vass, let's turn to you first. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I want to pick all of the above there, because I just want to start off by saying, when a lot of the time when we talk about privacy, we place this emphasis on the burden on the individual. And right now, the burden on the individual in Canada is still almost absurdly high when it comes to managing our digital selves, managing our online life. There's so many micro opportunities we have to make those choices. And, you know, depending on the social media app that we're using or how we're working, you know, there can be a lot of activity that's happening behind the scenes or isn't apparent in that initial, what kind of word is that? In that initial trade-off when we're making that selection. But since you asked the question, let me point to kind of two broad areas. The first is the workplace, right? With the workplace being pushed online for more white collar workers that maybe previously didn't have that flexibility, we're seeing the same kind of the proliferation of soft surveillance that has come to characterize low-wage retail and service work for more people. And what do I mean by that? There are more software programs that track time and report to your boss. As Khaled said, tracking your eye movements, monitoring your keystrokes, taking random screenshots of your screen, even turning on your webcam to see, is that person at their desk? Now, we're not having robust conversations about where those guardrails should be yet. And as we plan for what the world of work looks like going forward, these tools might be part of that negotiation. So we need better guardrails for workers in terms of balancing kind of what should be, how we get that proportionality and balance kind of privacy issues in an employer-employee relationship. A second place, and then the shout out to Microsoft, right? Who gets those updates from Microsoft about how fast they respond to meetings or emails or their time alone and how many collaborators they have? That's not necessarily shared with your employer, but it can be. Will we see startups that say, hey, invest in our startup because look how many hours our workers put in and we have the data? So that's one area. And a second, I think, is health. And this is a really interesting conversation in Canada. Telemedicine, health apps, that exchange is fundamentally different when it's online, not just in terms of how data is stored, but also the way we're digitizing health insurance and other incentives. I think it's really exciting and really there's been a lot of Canadian innovation in that regard, but it hasn't come through with that broader public conversation. So I know we're going to talk more about this, but ultimately for me, the biggest gap is legislative. It's those guardrails that can better protect and empower Canadian consumers and also innovators to keep doing amazing things in a digital big data context.
Amazing. That's a great lead in to talk about the legislation. So John, I know you've dealt with a lot of cases surrounding privacy issues. Can you share some that might be relevant to this discussion today and what we can learn from them? And what new legislation should we all be aware of when it comes to privacy in Canada?
Well, thank you, Melina, and thank you to McMaster for inviting me to this interesting privacy panel. Let me start by explaining that in my past life, I worked at the Competition Bureau for almost 34 years and was the head of the agency for my last 5 years. So we were not principally responsible for privacy. That regulator is the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So they have principal authority over that. But nonetheless, the Competition Act does intersect with privacy issues in two ways. First of all, the Competition Act includes consumer protection and issues that are surrounding competition. And in the competition side, companies are now beginning to compete on the non-price side for privacy protection. For example, if you take a look, Apple is advertising significantly all the privacy protections it offers. So when there is some anti-competitive conduct by a large firm or during a merger, and that results in lower privacy protection, that could create a competition issue in theory. And there have been no cases on that front. But what we do see is consumer protection cases at the Competition Bureau. And for misleading advertising, for example, or misleading representations. And one of the complaints I received, or our organization received, was against Ashley Madison. It's the digital platform for those looking for some fun outside of their marriage, adultery sites, I guess you'd call it. And there was a significant data breach. And all the information of its users was released publicly and caused a significant discord amongst a number of marriages. But there was a fee being paid by customers to Ashley Madison for enhanced privacy protection, which turned out to be a ruse. It was a fraud. There was no extra protection. And then complaint was made to us. We deferred and referred that to our privacy commissioner, and they took action along with the Australians and the FTC. FTC ultimately imposed administrative monetary penalties of 1.5 million or something of that effect. And there was orders imposed in Canada, Australia, and the US. So that was our first foray into consumer protection and privacy. We deferred at the Bureau. However, in the wake of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, where Facebook was allowing third parties to harvest its data and used for political messaging, obviously a serious infraction of privacy laws, not only in Canada, but around the world. Again, our privacy commissioner immediately investigated, but doesn't the commission, under the current legislation, there are no significant sanctions or penalties available. So the Bureau also took up an investigation for misleading representations, found that Facebook had violated the Competition Act, and agreed to a consent order where a $9.9 million fine or administrative penalty was imposed by the Competition Bureau on Facebook. Many would say just a slap on the wrist, compared to the US FTC, where a $5 billion fine was imposed on Facebook, and billions were also paid in Europe and elsewhere for the same infraction. And that gave rise to calls for strengthening Canada's privacy law. That law that we currently see before the House is called Bill C-11. It's the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, and it would significantly increase the obligations for consent that the legislation currently has, but they would be require more informed and more meaningful consent. There would also be more access to personal data through interoperability and portability, and there'd be the right to deletion, which isn't currently available under Canada law, and there's more transparency around algorithms. So not only is privacy regulated federally, but also by provinces. Many provinces are enacting their own privacy legislation. Quebec currently has probably the strongest privacy laws in the country, very similar to what you see in Europe under the GDPR. So all this to say is there is action afoot. The Competition Bureau, whether or not they should continue to do privacy work in the consumer protection space is a question. There's a debate whether or not there needs to be over-enforcement, that have to have this backstop of the Competition Bureau doing misleading advertising or misleading representation when there's this new legislation, where there will also be significant sanction powers granted to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and there'll be an adjudicative process similar to what you find now with competition law. So all this to say is privacy is a hot ticket item before Parliament. Given the minority government, we might not see that legislation come to fruition until a new government is formed. That's the only concern I would have right now. It's on a slow track because of the minority government aspects of trying to get legislation through the House and the pending election that everyone is speculating about.
Great. Bill C-11, definitely an important thing for all Canadians to be aware of. Other thoughts from either John, Vass, or Rupinder about Bill C-11 and the fact that it's a little bit on a slow track. It's going to take some time before it comes forward. What happens in the meantime? And do you think that it will be successful, knocking on wood once it's implemented? Thoughts on Bill C-11 more broadly?
I can jump in on that one. So I actually sit on the Data and Privacy Committee for the CMA, which is the Canadian Marketing Association. So obviously lots of discussion and thoughts around, does C-11 go far enough? Does it go too far? And we've been big sponsors of pushing that legislation through, because we think it strikes a good balance of making sure people are protected, but also some good considerations for just innovation and things like that companies need to drive. I think part of the thing that we have to, be careful of is do regulations go too far in a form that then actually really hinders a company's ability to be innovative and to do things that are, let's face it, our global competitors are already well versed in doing. And I think the key thing to understand is not all AI is created equal, not all applications of AI are created equal. Are we treating a personalized recommendation engine the same way that we're treating a an algorithm that tells you to vote a certain way, right? And so just making sure that I think what I like is that there's a lot of industry input on what does this mean for different organizations, small, medium, and large, and just making sure we're not disadvantaging Canadian companies and disadvantaging, small to medium-sized Canadian companies who also want access to this type of technology, but by creating barriers and things that would be super difficult to overcome within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, AI is part of it. I think it's provocative and modern that this legislation lets us talk about striking that balance, whatever it is, between commercial actors that want to suck up as much information as possible online and then leverage it for their own purposes, or, inform a machine learning algorithm. But the reality is, this is a digital age of competition. And when you're competing online, firms want to be able to find ways to incentivize people to shop more often and spend more. And the way they do it is with data. So they need to be able to derive insights from the information that they have and potentially, couple that up with other data sets that are out there. And as much as possible, I think, making those conversations concrete and relatable for people will help us continue to have that conversation. Unfortunately, I do think C11 is going to get stalled out. And we'll see if privacy ends up being an election issue in ways big and small, because unfortunately that legislation does not extend those provisions to political parties. And I think that really hurts the legitimacy of legislation like that if we're not going to see political parties held to the same standard that we're going to hold public and private actors to.
Absolutely. Let's move on a little bit now, talking about different kinds of applications. So we've hinted at, obviously, over the pandemic, we are now, everything we're doing is online, right? Whether we're working online, we're shopping online, we're socializing online. A lot of our day-to-day, Vass, you hinted at the health issues online, but even financial transactions being online more so than ever before. So we're moving our daily financial services, are moving to our devices. We know that open banking is on the horizon. So John, let me hear your thoughts on privacy when it comes to the evolving services and offerings from a financial perspective, especially with open banking just around the corner.
Yes, and I'm hopeful it's just around the corner. When I was working at the Bureau, we put out a comprehensive study supporting opening up banking to allow for fintechs to enter into the marketplace, made recommendations to the government. That's making its way through Senate. Senate's put out a report supporting open banking, and Finance is currently reviewing the need for this legislation. Obviously, some concerns that you're hearing from the banks pertain to security of the systemic risk of the system, the whole financial system, by allowing these third parties, potentially problematic third parties on the system. And of course, privacy rights could be violated by fintech companies if there isn't proper rules and regulations in place. So that's an important piece to open banking, is ensuring that any new entrant does have proper data protection rules, and for consumers that will have the right to port their data from the banks to these fintech companies for financial services. However, that's highly sensitive information. We need to be ensured that there are rules in place, and enforceable rules as well, not just voluntary compliance, I would argue. So there may be need for some regulator to ensure that fintech companies are compliant. But I'm a big believer in competition and opening up the banking system so consumers have a wide range of products and better services and better prices, because I think that will be the result. And we're seeing that in Europe. And then we can use Europe as a model. We're lagging far behind. The UK has had open banking in place for a number of years, as is the European Union, and it's working. I mean, they've had a few slips, but for the most part, you've seen consumers switching to non-bank entities for their financial services, all for the betterment of consumers at the end of the day. And telecommunications is another area that's emerging. As we all know, the pipes to all our communication run through telecommunication companies, whether it's wireless, and we're on the verge and we're rolling out 5G, the Internet of Things. So everything we do will be captured online now. And we want to make sure that there's privacy protections in place. Currently, we have PIPEDA, and the CRTC also, who enforces the Telecom Act, Telecommunications Act. There is a commitment to privacy there. So there is some checks and balances today, but those needs to be strengthened. The Yale report, which is a blue ribbon panel struck to review the Telecom and Broadcasting Act, has recommended Canada adopt GDPR type protections for the to ensure that those types of privacy issues don't emerge and create havoc with emerging products.
Amazing. I'm just popping over to the Q&A, and we've had a couple of questions that came up where this has struck a chord because some people don't even understand what open banking is. And I suspect that within Canada, there's probably a lot of the population that doesn't necessarily have open banking on top of mind, because we tend to be quite conservative as Canadians with our financial institutions, given that we have so few and they're very well established. Could you give us a little 101 primer, John, as to what is open banking and what might we be able to see if it does roll out as it has in other parts of the world?
Yeah, well, as we know, or many may know, that there are banks, Class A banks, that are deposit-taking institutions that have been regulated and are regulated, and they need to be Canadian. There are a number of rules in place to ensure that your deposits are protected, financial transactions are protected. And so there's a real bevy of rules and regulations creating this regulatory barrier around our major banks. And so others want to provide financial services, but they need access to the consumers' accounts, their savings, and their ability to transfer money to these financial technology companies for other financial services. And they can't under the current rules. And so the rules need to be open up. So open banking means opening up the rules to allow for more competition for other small businesses and larger businesses to interact, whether it be big tech companies, whether it be innovative new companies like Wealthsimple and others who are offering services for trading of stocks and bonds, etc. It just loosening the rules to allow others to play does come with some potential risks of security and privacy. So those need to be put in place before it happens. And hence, Canada is usually very conservative in changing rules. Like we were during the financial crisis, we were late to change our rules on banking then. We seem to be adopting the same template here, but we're falling further and further behind other G7 countries in terms of our competitiveness in the financial services space because we are not moving quick enough. And again, there are a lot of advocates for us to move a bit more quickly in this area. But perhaps the pandemic is what has slowed things down, but others say there's vested interest in place that don't want to see this move very quickly.
The pandemic could also have the effect of making us more comfortable as well. As we're doing things online that we would not have envisioned us doing online 14, 15 months ago. Let's turn a little bit now towards over and under regulations. So Vass, based off of your work and this research specifically within this field, what areas do you think are over or under regulated when it comes to privacy in Canada?
Well, maybe I can speak to some of the mechanisms that we're chatting about, because as John was pointing to with open banking is a great opportunity to have a conversation around data portability, right? Which is related to data ownership, our ability to request a copy of information that a company has about us and maybe move it somewhere else, as well as the interoperability and how interoperability, so I mean, it's such a fancy word for all that it means is, the ability of one API, I'm not making this useful, am I, to kind of plug in somewhere else, kind of, it facilitates the portability. I'll do a better job with this question because I love it. I think we've already observed, I think there's good consensus in Canada that the mechanics of consent have been underregulated and that people want something stronger there, right? Consent should be opt-in, specific and non-transferable. I think something else that's really exciting about C11 that we didn't quite get to touch on is around explainability, right? So we don't want this black box environment when it's related to AI and kind of why you're seeing an ad or receiving something. So Bill C11 contains the right to an explanation of why an AI made a decision about you, and the right to opt out of having your information collected in the first place. So what I think gets lost when even when I say interoperability, probably, but when we're so casual with just how we even talk about about Bill C11 is how do we make sure we're bringing people along and having those bigger conversations about what people want and what they need? Because I think the biggest conversation, the most productive one we can have about what's under and over regulated is just reminding people how I can't say words today, how in comparison, the online world is so under-regulated. And we have to be careful not to have the same expectations that we hold in the physical world. And I'll just sort of say I pointed to health and health apps. If something's a true health product, we have a very robust regulatory framework through Health Canada for those products to go through to receive approval before they're on a shelf or able to be prescribed. But really, the Apple Store, I think we've seen in Google Play, are the most powerful online regulators that we have. Forget what privacy legislation we have in Canada. They are the companies deciding what's accessible to consumers and also now setting new thresholds on privacy in terms of what will go forward. So maybe I'm slipping out of your question by sort of just saying, yes, being supportive of new legislative interventions in Canada, because we don't have the same protections in our online environment that we've been privileged with in our offline one. And it's time to catch up and clearly communicate them so that we can empower and support people to live a safe online life.
Great. Rupinder, now let's turn to your experiences more on the retail side. How has data and its privacy allowed companies like HBC to improve their offerings to customers?
So before I do that, I talk about that, I'd love to just add on to what Vass was saying. I think an opportunity where we need more government intervention and regulation is, and you touched on it a little bit, is on the cybersecurity side, right? And I think that's part of what gets lost in this conversation. Are companies equipped? Are they investing enough money? Are they investing in the right tools and capabilities to make sure that the data that they do collect is protected, right? And I think in Canada, we're still lagging behind a little bit in terms of, just how much we invest in cybersecurity. So there's a lot of work, obviously, that needs to be done on the privacy side. However, I think we got to be careful about not over-indexing and then leaving this gap where companies need to be investing more and locking down environments and things like that. So then back to your question. So yeah, I've been in the data space now for 20 years actually, and I'll do a plug for McMaster, where my first foray into this was your information systems class when I was back at Mac. And so I've really seen this evolution of data being viewed as kind of just what comes out of the exhaust of a system, to, okay, let's use data to track the performance of an organization, to now let's use data to be at the forefront of how we innovate and meet customers where they are and have better products and offerings and experiences for customers. So it's been exciting to see the evolution of that. And so I think it's important to look at, yes, there is a risk around this external monetization of customer data, where your organizations are looking to sell customer data and using it for all of these things that perhaps are a little bit not what customers would expect. But there's also a lot of great things happening around, like I said, personalizing that customer experience, making sure that you're only seeing things that are relevant to your style and what you like. And it spreads across kind of the full gamut of things, right? And I think as consumers are kind of shifting and people are, the consumer kind of range falls into people who've been born in this kind of digital and data age. I think the threshold and the bar for what kind of personalization people are expecting and convenience people are expecting and consumers are expecting has been raised, right? And I think companies need to be able to meet those consumers where they are. In the retail space, before joining HBC, I also led and organized the AI Labs team at Bell Canada. And so the common thread across both of those, great Canadian companies was let's elevate the conversation and talk about how is customer data part of our brand, right? And how is that relationship with our customer, and therefore how we're going to treat customer data? How do we make that core to what we're doing and make it part of our brand? And so super important that I think companies, engage in that kind of conversation, because data is a big part of your connection with your customer, and therefore your relationship and the trust that you build with your customer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So go ahead, John.
I was just going to chime in terms of my experience dealing, particularly with larger corporations, is they understand how important their reputations are, and how important it is to be seen and to be complying with the law. For the most part, most companies want to respect the law, notwithstanding all the noise we hear about Facebook this and there's some violations, but for the most part, I'm working with companies very closely. They want to respect the law. Their reputations are at stake. They have compliance by design. They have corporate compliance programs where they invest in to make sure employees understand the law and comply with it. So again, this thought that big corporations are out there looking to just abuse their position on their consumers, again, it's not sustainable. Customers will switch if you don't trust the company and to handle your data and handle your information. You're going to leave. And this information is not only from the digital age. When we first started with credit cards or in signing up for those, and all that personal information was provided to the corporation. Again, that data for the most part was protected unless there was a breach. Very rarely was it used for commercialization. We're seeing a movement towards it, and there needs to be rules. But again, if there are laws in place, my experience has been that most companies want to respect those rules and laws.
Totally.
Yeah.
Isn't the data stewardship a little bit different than the kind of offers generated through loyalty programs, though? I mean, a loyalty program is essentially a micropayment for data. It's a way to earn money it's an exchange between people where you're sharing information so that you can receive, have a better, I guess, relationship, receive a more targeted offer based on your socioeconomic status, your spending elsewhere, etc. Which is just a reminder that in this digital age, pre-pandemic as well, personal data is a primary source of economic power, and it creates huge knowledge asymmetries between people. And when you look at the marketing side of things, which is a really fascinating space, earlier you asked me about kind of what's on the horizon. We're on the cusp of a voice recognition marketing revolution where we are leveraging insights about people's health, age, gender, health. I already said health, from their voice. And we're collecting this information mostly in call centers and applying it to, through smart speakers so that we can, again, I guess, have a better relationship with people and make a more targeted ad, but just all about selling things in a competitive online environment, I guess.
Yeah, I think I get where you're coming from, right? And I understand that, right? And like I said, I'm not here to speak for kind of the full industry and how data is used, for sure, right? Yeah. And this is, like I said, it's been an opportunity to elevate the conversation, and it's in the same realm or stratosphere as environmental responsibility and the end corporate ethics, right? As far as I'm concerned, right? That your company is either committed to doing it the right way and the right thing, to be, responsible for your shareholders and all of that, or there's more, nefarious needs or incentives at play, right? And so I'm not going to say that there's, anything just falls into one camp or the other. However, I do want us to recognize that, marketing at its core is convincing people and making them feel some kind of response to make them want to buy a product, right? Whether it's a car, whether it's an ad that you see, whether it's a, back in the day, a flashy swimsuit, like that is what marketing is, right? And has been. And is this just the natural evolution of marketing and how marketing is done, given that we now have access to all of these things, right? I do think that there's a difference between internal monetization and external monetization, right? I like to focus on the former, right? Internal monetization means, do you use customer preferences and data to improve your logistics supply chain? Make sure you have the right number of products in the right place. Make sure you are optimizing how customers are getting their deliveries to their homes, right? There's a lot of different use cases that are really valuable there. And that's where I say that there's a risk in kind of painting everything with the same brush. I think the key to it is transparency, right? The more transparent you can be to customers about, we collect this information about your interaction with us, and here's all the places that it gets used, and then the ability to opt out and to delete their data. And I think we actually institutionalized that last year with the California Consumer Protection Act when CCPA came out. So, these types of things are things that any organization that's going to have a robust data program has to be thinking about and has to be core and part of their foundational capabilities.
I think that these are very important points, because when we think about privacy, we tend to think about security breaches. We think about the negative, and sometimes we lose sight of the value that the data can provide. As you mentioned, personalization, convenience, value-added services, but it really comes at a balance, and also making sure that the appropriate transparency is there. Looking at the time, I want to make sure that we do have time to get to our questions, because there's some great ones that have come in through the Q&A, and I want to remind our audience to add your questions in there, as well as the ones that have been submitted earlier. But before we go there, I want to ask each of you, if you had to give, let's say, your top 2 or 3 very practical tips to people on how to best protect themselves when it comes to privacy of their data, what would those tips be? Who wants to start us off?
I'll kick it off.
Okay.
I did that straw poll that we kicked off the session with my wife this morning. And one of her responses just knocked me off my seat. My wife is a retired civil servant, university educated. She didn't realize we had privacy laws in Canada. And the whole question of consent, not really understanding it. So I think, and of course I was flabbergasted, but nonetheless, I pointed out we do have laws, and there are many checks and balances in place to help protect your privacy, but more can be done. So I think as a consumer, people should be aware that their privacy, if you're interested in protecting it, which many are based on the poll, that you should have some understanding of the need for consent, and you to consent for people to use your data. I think that's the number one tip, quite frankly, and be careful of what you're putting online. I mean, that's an obvious one. So many people are slipping in terms of providing information about who they are, their families and whatnot on Facebook, and pictures and whatnot. Know that that's gone to the entire world. Just keep that in mind. There's no privacy there. You've just by yourself, regardless of the rules in place. If you're posting yourself information that's very private, it's out. Genie's out of the bottle.
I'll offer 3. One's pretty practical. Just getting a password manager and having complex and different passwords for your online environment. If you don't have one already, hang on, there's a Toronto-based company that's quite successful. I'll put it in the chat because I can't remember it right now, but they're a great option. So that's practical. Protective for your smart home devices, which are pretty cool, but most of us, studies show, just use it to ask what the weather is. I would advise you to turn off always listening mode. I think always listening is the kind of new always on for location services. And then consider getting involved in activism and advocacy, not just supporting the legislation that you might like. It's really important for legislators to hear from people, but it's okay for us to say no to certain applications of this technology, like facial recognition in stores. Maybe we just shouldn't go there, but we're not going to know that unless we have a good, robust public conversation about it.
And Rupinder, any last
Yeah,
tips?
so I've got 2 tips for users, and then one maybe for, we've got a lot of, corporate and small and large business leaders in the group. So from a practical perspective, read the fine print, go put in the effort to actually read and understand what people are doing with your data, whether it's a social media app or anything else, and then make a conscious decision of, am I okay with that, right? Secondly, be mindful of what your kids are doing on your iPads and whatnot. My son managed to put his own Face ID into my iPad, and I found out from that when my password was his Roblox username. So be mindful of what your kids are doing. They're getting incredibly technically savvy these days. And then lastly, for the business leaders in the group, use this opportunity to elevate the data conversation in your organizations, right? And make it part of that executive conversation to say, what do we want our relationship to be with our customers? And, how do we view data as part of that relationship? And then what are all the rules and regulations and our own standards and checks and balances that we want to have in place?
That's fantastic. Thank you all for those very practical tips. Now we're going to turn to the Q&A. And again, there were some that were submitted beforehand and many that have come through. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them. I do apologize in advance. So I'm just going to selectively pick ones that I think speak to a lot of the topics we've been covering today. One which, Vass, you were just talking very briefly about facial recognition. Doreen, I was wondering, how does facial recognition technology fit into the conversation that we're having today around privacy? And Louise has also asked about voice recognition. So what about these new technologies, facial and voice recognition, and how concerned should we be when it comes to privacy of this different type of data?
A couple of quick thoughts. One is that the information is being collected to inform new applications of that technology, right? That are, as other targeted ad situations are, many would argue, fundamentally discriminatory. So to either recognize where you are or have been, where does your gaze linger when you're shopping? What are you looking at? What's the shopping experience? And it's very easy to see the two sides of that coin, right? Of how it's beneficial for a store, but also kind of might overstep or create discomfort. With voice recognition technology, to understand your mood could be applied in the workplace during job interviews. I think the most dangerous application is in a democratic context and with policymaking. And what it all comes back to in terms of our privacy, I think, is that the economic relationship with targeted advertising that we've kind of been speaking a lot about in this panel. And I think the scariest thing to think about micro-targeted ads is that they actually don't really work, right? There are a lot of research papers in support of this idea showing that the company's returns on investment in digital marketing are generally anemic, and yet it's something that we feel we absolutely must do. A recent study found that tech ad middlemen take as much as 50% cut of all online ad spending. So in that sense, it's a great kind of business area. And when we encourage firms to go online in a Canadian context, it's worth, reminding ourselves of who the companies are that help facilitate that advertising. And brands pay that premium for automated micro-targeting. One quick example from some of that research I'm citing, saying that that targeting of ads is often extremely poor. In one experiment, there were 6 different advertising platforms that were used in an effort to reach Australian men between the ages of 25 and 44. And that targeting performed slightly worse than just random guessing. So there is research out there that indicates, despite the extent of surveillance tech and these also new applications on the horizon, a lot of the data that fuels ad targeting is garbage. And I hope that can be part of our conversation going forward, because I think we're in this very optimistic, data is important, let's leverage it and let's kind of mine it and learn, right? Let's learn about marketplaces and our own companies and what we're successful with, but let's also take that learning with a grain of salt.
Okay, so it might not be as effective as we think, but as technology evolves and as AI, there are, as it was said already, there's many different types of AI, many different flavors, right? As AI does advance, and it becomes even more targeted and even more personal, and it taps into different types of data. John, from a legislative point of view, do you think we are set up to protect ourselves against what the future might hold and what we can't necessarily anticipate at this point in terms of the types of data and its use in the future?
Well, the whole area of facial recognition, voice recognition, I don't think current legislation contemplated that technology being commercialized and being out there. And as a result, I just think there needs to be more study in terms of improving the current regulations that protect privacy. I know the Privacy Commissioner has called out the RCMP even for its use of facial recognition with a private company. A private company would have access to all this personal data. And again, would in theory be a violation of our current PIPEDA legislation. But the name and shame of the few incidents that have been detected is not sufficient to deal with the widespread introduction of this new technology, which is going to be omnipresent with the Internet of Things. So again, more studies I think is required. Regulation does have to balance the privacy interests versus freedom of expression. Again, one of the beautiful things about the Internet is the freedom. I think you want to be careful about impinging on that. We don't want to become China, where all our content is controlled by a government as opposed to individuals. And then, of course, innovation is driven in large part from the information that gathers on the internet and elsewhere, particularly in the area of health and emerging new technologies and medicines. Life-saving medicines can evolve from data, from personal data, health data. And again, that's very sensitive. So the obligations for consent could undermine these innovations. So it's an important conversation. Balance is important. And I still think we have a ways to go in this conversation and in this policy development area.
I'd love to see the privacy, as the privacy legislation is being baked and formed and going through iterations. I'd love to see that committee actually partner with the Scale AI initiative, right? The Scale AI is a government initiative that is driving innovation and trying to push for more use of AI in the industry, because I think that those two groups will learn a lot from each other, and in terms of what things do we want to make sure that we're continuing to make room for and are baked into the Privacy Act in a way that is protective of consumer data, but at the same time not stifling a lot of innovation.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about from a commercial perspective. Now, we did hint at a little bit around the health side, and Kim in particular is asking in the Q&A. She sees incredible opportunity in health analytics, particularly in the addition of IoT sensors utilized to collect patient data. Her concern lies with both security of local hospital data and with many smaller hospitals, perhaps without as strong data security. So she's concerned about how to lock down the security of one of our greatest assets, data assets, which is our health. So further thoughts around advances and also cautions when it comes to our health data.
I wish I had something super savvy to say here. I mean, cybersecurity is not a core area of expertise for me, but I am observing the government investing more in cybersecurity research and training, and starting to recognize cybersecurity as a skill and doing more to kind of upskill kind of quickly through more of a micro-credentials approach, which could be helpful. And I'm glad, Kim, that you see that potential. And I think in a Canadian context too, the ability with personalized medicine, as John was saying, and kind of research applications, we do want to find that balance. Researchers, journalists, people want to share the information that they have and collect novel information, and sensors is part of that. And I think it's all about how do we set that up in a hospital setting in a way that's very clear to people, where they don't feel that it's a kind of hostage-like exchange, like you can get your medical care here, but you're going to have to go to the sensor ward. Because I think when it comes to people sharing data for research purposes, granted, of course, that research can be commercialized in novel ways. We know that Canadians are very excited about this, right? Look at how we respond to Statistics Canada and that opportunity to share information. We rush, we tweet about it, we take pictures about it. So it's all about, I guess, John, I'm using all of your words, balance, finding that balance for that enthusiasm and imagination and the application, while also, as you're pointing out, guarding it, protecting it, and maintaining it. And some have pointed out in the chat, a preference for storing information in Canada, not having that data kind of cross borders, because that can lead to other risks. So data sovereignty is a movement we might see growing over the next few years. Who knows? Maybe a topic for a future panel.
Yeah, Vass, good
Awesome.
job on an area that you're not an expert in. I thought you covered the area quite well. I'm not an expert in the area. However, we're seeing data breaches on a daily basis, not just in the health space, but with major corporations, just recently in the US with the oil and gas sector. It's an area that, more investment is required, better technology is required to create these firewalls and protect this vital data. I don't know if there's a better answer than that. There's just needs investment to protect the privacy of our data. How do you incentivize innovation? How do you incentivize companies? Again, that's usually led by government. Military applications, generally, they like to protect their information. Governments like to protect their information. They may have cutting edge technology that they may want to share. That may be an avenue. I mean, a lot of our developments in the IT space come from military applications. So again, I'm speculating, not my area of expertise either, but it's the firewalls that need to be strengthened if we can do that against these hackers who are, they're pretty innovative in their own way.
Yeah. I'll pose two more questions because I see Halid's turned on his video, which means that we probably need to wrap up pretty quickly. And this first question might not be necessarily the right kind of venue for this forum, but somebody was asking about blockchain and whether or not anybody has any experience or background with blockchain and how this affects our discussion today around privacy. Is this potentially going to be a little bit of a silver bullet for us down the road? And we could just say that we'll talk about that in a different panel. I was feeling you out to see whether or not we had some blockchain expertise on the panel here today.
Sorry, no mas.
All right, well, we'll pass on that one. Stay tuned for probably a future session from DeGroote. The last question is actually something which came up in the pre-questions before our session today. And it's one that was near and dear to my heart, so I wanted to speak to this one myself, which was about educational institutions. Privacy and security is going to be an ongoing battle going forward into the 21st century. How are new educational programs at post-secondary institutions addressing this growing field of work? So I had to jump on that one myself and do a little bit of a plug as well. It is absolutely something that is important at different levels. There's a number of programs out there across Canada, across the world, that provide the technical piece. So they get into the technology of the security, but what we're seeing more so where the gap is understanding as managers, as business leaders, as industry leaders, public or private, what does it mean for us when it comes to making decisions around privacy and making sure that we speak a lot of those transparency themes and focus that we heard about today. So we are starting to see more and more programs that do tap into the privacy issues and importantly also the ethics issues around data. So it's not just what you can or can't do by legislation, but what you should do. And being really mindful of the technologies that we build today, which might be in the best intentions to be able to provide great value-added services for our customers or our other key stakeholders, may have unintended uses, right? Can be used in ways that they were not initially designed to be able to gather data and to use data in ways that might harm us. So really to think about those ethical considerations, not just of today, but of the technology down the road as well. And we are starting to see that more so happening within various business programs, whether it's at the undergraduate commerce level, MBA, or at the EMBA level. And here's my little plug, because coming back to our executive MBA at DeGroote in digital transformation, it is really the only program so far in North America that has that lens, where we're thinking as middle to senior managers, how do we leverage the asset that data is, while at the same time really thinking about from a strategic point of view, how do you mitigate against those risks, not just today, but those risks that might come down the road? So we are starting to see more of that from a managerial perspective, where traditionally it's been more so the realm of the technology and the computer science. So I'm hopeful that that will be something that we'll start to see more and more within Canada and around the world as well. With that, I'm looking at the time, we got 1 minute left. Thank you so much for all your fantastic questions, and to our great panel. I will pass it back to Khaled to do the official thank you.
Thank you, Milena, and thank you again to Vass, Rupinder, Jean, and Milena for being here today and sharing your insights with us on this important topic. What an interesting presentation we had today. I'll just clarify one point about the tracking tools, given the discussion that we use in our research at the McMaster Digital Transformation Research Center. These are used strictly in experimental settings to improve the user experience. The experimental protocols we use are approved by the McMaster Research Ethics Board and are collected with the full consent of participants. So there's no privacy violation there. We hope you all enjoyed today's webinar, and please continue to check the DeGroote website to see what webinars we have coming up. Thank you again, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.